Oi, time, boa tarde para todo mundo. Imagino que vocês estejam aí, cada um nas suas casas. Nós estamos hoje aqui numa casa super especial. Nós estamos fazendo hoje a segunda edição do LionCast, que é o videocast do Grupo Publicis, diretamente da Casa Cor, num bar secreto que tem aqui, então um lugar que nem é acessível a todo o público. Quem gosta de arquitetura e de design, vale super a pena vir conhecer a Casa Cor, o espaço é lindo. E esse bar que a gente está é muito, muito especial, só não é mais especial do que o nosso convidado. Hoje a gente tem um convidado vindo diretamente dos Estados Unidos para falar com a gente, uma pessoa muito ilustre, muito importante para o Grupo Publicis, um dos grandes responsáveis por ter feito o Grupo Publicis chegar onde nós estamos hoje, por toda a transformação. Então a gente vai fazer esse videocast em inglês, tá? Então eu vou pedir para vocês, para todo mundo ativar as legendas aí no computador direto de vocês. Depois isso vai virar um videocast que vai ser publicado nas nossas redes, vai ser publicado também no Spotify, no YouTube. Então o videocast vai ser a partir de agora em inglês. Então não esqueçam, ativem as legendas para quem achar que ajuda. E vai ser um prazer enorme aqui a gente fazer. Tô eu, Iza, Gabi, para a gente bater um papo com o Rishad Tobaccowala, que, como eu falei, foi mais de 35 anos do Grupo Publicis, hoje continua dando consultoria e é a pessoa para quem Arthur Sadum e Maurice Levy ligam até hoje quando tem qualquer dúvida ou precisam de inspiração, tá bom? Então a gente está muito, muito feliz de recebê-lo aqui no Brasil. Vou agora mudar para o inglês. Hi everyone, welcome. This is the second edition of LionCast, the podcast and the videocast for Publicis Groupe. We are very, very happy to receive a very special guest in a very special place. We are direct from Casa Cor in Parque da Água Branca, here in São Paulo, in a more special place inside Casa Cor, that it's a speakeasy. So everything is really, really special, but definitely the most special thing that we have, it's our guest, that it's Rishad Tobaccowala. Tobaccowala, it's a guest that it's part of Publicis Groupe. He used to be inside the group for more than 35 years. He was the right hand and the very important mind in the business transformation that the group made in the last 10 years, and he was part of this as a chief strategy officer. So, of course, he will present himself much better than I do. And we are here to discuss a little bit and to talk a little bit about his book, that it's Rethinking Work, that brings a lot of amazing perspective. We had the chance to meet Tobaccowala in Panama in our regional meeting 3 months ago. It was an amazing experience, so it's the reason why we decided to invite him. So we have here Rishad Tobaccowala. We have also Gabi, that is our CEO for Publicis Groupe Brasil, and also Iza, that is our Chief Talent Officer for Publicis Groupe Brasil. So welcome, Rishad.
Thank you very much.
Great
Thank you
pleasure
for having
to have
me.
you. Thanks a lot. We know that it's a long flight, a long trip, but we hope that you enjoy the videocast, but also that you enjoy São Paulo and our country that we love. We know that we have a lot of challenges and changes going on in our country, in the work environment. So it will be amazing also to have a chat later on to understand your perspective in Brazil.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So if I can ask you, like, in some minutes, just to present yourself, that
Sure.
Definitely you do it better than I.
First of all, thank you for all of you all to invite me, for the hospitality. This is a fantastic place, and for everybody sort of listening. So best way of saying it is I grew up in a BRIC country. Remember they used to say BRIC? Brazil, Russia, India, China, right? So interestingly, the last country I was in, besides the United States, where I just came from, was in India. And I actually did something for Anupriya Acharya, who runs your version of India, South Asia. So she's the CEO of the market there. So it's great to be in Brazil. And as I was reading about it, I mentioned to my wife that Sao Paulo is the world's largest city outside of Asia, which I did not know.
Wow.
It's the world's largest city outside of Asia. So it's great to be here, and I've not had a chance to be here. So I grew up in India, got a degree in math, came to the University of Chicago, got an MBA, and got exactly one job offer because I was only one of like 3 Indians that were graduating at that time.
Wow.
And the only job offer I got was for a company called Leo Burnett. So I joined Leo Burnett, and I wanted to work in a company that had marketing and strategy, which was Leo Burnett. So I joined Leo Burnett, and I thought I'd spend a few years there, learn about American culture, and go get a job. And it's kind of interesting. Yesterday, before I caught a plane here, I did a What Next episode in 35 West Wacker, which is the Leo Burnett building, with Renetta McCann, who is a very senior person there. And she used to actually run Stockholm in its early days. And Renetta and I have known each other for 40 years, and we had a conversation. And when I entered the building, my key card still works. So 43 years later,
Wow.
I'm still there. So it gives you an idea. I'm talking about change, but I've never changed. I worked for the same place for 37 years as an employee. But in those days, the last time my business card said Leo Burnett was 1993. Wow. And I stopped being a full-time employee in 2019. So what was I doing between 1993 and 2019? Had I fallen asleep? So in 1993, we launched one of the first interactive marketing groups. It was called Giant Step. Then in 98, 99, I helped gentlemen like Jack Clues and others spin off Leo Burnett Media into Stockholm. And I launched also a digital operation called Stockholm IP. We then merged with Media West, and I worked at Stockholm Media West. We then got bought by the Publicis Groupe, and we created a unit called Publicis Media version 1.0, which was then Adopter Media and Stockholm Media West Group. Working with management, I built the case that we needed to be more digital. So we then bought companies like Digitas and Razorfish, which we put inside with Publicis Media, and we created something called Viveki, which was a new platform. And then when we unbundled Viveki after Jack Clues, who I was working with, and Maurice and Jack left, and David Kenny, who came in as Digitas, I chaired Digitas and Razorfish. And then for the last 5 years I was there, I was the chief strategist and the chief growth officer working with Maurice. So
you led our transformation.
Yeah, so I was involved in things like the Epsilon and Epsilon at the very end slightly, but Sapient, all the other, and then obviously worked with the current team on what they were basically sort of doing. So that is what I've done. So I've actually had a journey where the company I joined, Leo Burnett, had 1,500 employees globally. And the company that we currently work at has 105,000 employees globally, which is interesting. And one of the things I did do was identify countries outside France and the United States that were important. So including India, which what most people don't realize is out after the United States, the largest number of employees of Publicis Groupe are in India.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So looking for this journey, can you tell me a little bit how came this motivation to think and to write about rethinking work?
So there were two reasons for it. One was I started thinking about work when I decided that I wanted to do something different than what I was doing before. So, and there were a couple of reasons. So many, many years ago, somebody told me this line, which is every career has a midnight hour. The smart people leave at 5 to 12.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is when people still like you, you should leave.
That's when you should
Which
leave the room.
is when people, right?
Yeah.
And I used the changing of management which is Maurice becoming executive chairman and Mr. Sadoun taking over as CEO. And I had a very good relationship with him because I was working with him. He was one of the sort of director. So I said, there's a new era which requires new teams. So I should exit stage left to do something different. And my wife basically said, what's wrong with you? Right? And there were two reasons she asked, what's wrong with you? She always asks me what's wrong with me, as our daughters do. But her whole stuff is, you've spent 37 years in the same company. What are you going to say you do when people ask you, what do you do? Right? And so I read books about that. And what I began to realize is work is very central to humans. And work is not the same as necessarily a job. But wherever you go, they ask you, what do you do?
Yeah.
Right? So work is also your identity.
Yeah.
Yes.
But to a great extent, what she was also saying is, will anybody ever talk to you? Because you've been working with these people around the world for 37 years. So work is also community. So even though you may not like your co-workers, they are your community. And your clients and your suppliers and your partners. And work is also purpose, what you get up in the morning for. And even though it's sometimes hard and bosses complain, work is also growth because they force you to grow. So I began to realize work was very central. So that was the first thing. So that got me thinking. But I wrote another book. But my first book wasn't this.
Yeah.
But when COVID happened, and when people started saying, okay, now we're going to go back to the way it used to be, I said, wait. It's not going to be like that. And I began to realize that because of things like generational shifts, AI, the ability to work from anywhere, the rise of marketplaces like at Uber and Etsy, right? It was going to be very different in the future. So I basically decided that there were three things I believed. One is that work was very central to humans. And in fact, outside of relationships and health, those are the only other things that are important. So if you want to look at somebody who's successful or happy, they have good job, they have good work. They're happy with their work. They have good relationships and they've got pretty good health. Those are the three things that seem to matter. But what's interesting is if you actually have good work, you are likely to live longer and it actually helps you with your relationships.
Everything's connected.
Everything's connected. And then, so I said, okay, work is central. But the second is I think work will change more between 2019 and 2029 than the previous 50 years. So it's central and it's going to change more than it's ever changed in the next 10 years or now 5 years. And the third was, but nobody's actually thinking about it straight. So I said, important stuff, changing stuff. So I like change. That's what I work on.
Yeah.
Important stuff, changing stuff. And I don't think know what's about to hit them. So that's why I wrote the book.
Amazing. And I had the pleasure to read the book.
Yes.
And also get the book with your signature, that it's very, very special. But before we deep dive in the book, could you give us a rapid fire tour of the 5 forces you say that are rewriting work?
Yeah, so there are 5 reasons that work is changing, and this is true everywhere. This is global. So this is not, certain things are a little bit more in certain countries, but it's completely true all across Latin America. It's clearly true in Brazil, okay? Some of the statistics might be different. So the 5 forces are, first is the societal changes. And the societal changes are 3. One is, in most countries outside of 7 countries in the world's population is both declining and it's aging. Mm-hmm. And so when you have fewer workers and older workers, you have to think differently about work.
Yeah.
So that's number 1. Mm-hmm. 2, for the first time, you have 4 generations at work all at the same time.
Yes.
And the older generations like myself and the younger generations, which are now becoming the most dominant, largest part in most companies, are Gen Z, no longer baby boomers, right? We have different mindsets. Again, I'm generalizing. Yeah. A baby boomer believes in capitalism. 67% of us believe in capitalism. 22% of Gen Z believe in capitalism. Less than 20% of baby boomers want to work for themselves. 76% of Gen Z want to work for themselves. Most baby boomers have one job and that's what they do. 67% of Gen Z, in addition to their job, have a side hustle or side gig. So it's a generational shift. And we in senior management, I'm now unemployed author. But when I was senior management, we may not understand exactly what that generation is thinking about. So there's generation. So that's societal.
Yeah.
Second is technology. Obviously, AI is one, blockchain is one, VR is one. Third is marketplaces. That's very big. So marketplaces are things like Etsy, Shopify, Amazon, Mercado Libre, etc. All these kinds of like marketplaces. So marketplace allows you to both buy and sell, including your own services or your own passions.
Yeah.
So you could be having a full-time job as a chief strategist of, Leo Burnett, Brazil. And in the evenings, you could be selling vases that you make at home on Etsy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And maybe just for the fun of it, because you're trying to make ends meet or you want to buy a boat or something, you drive Ubers. Right? That's very, very different. So, but you can now do it. You can get opportunities without having to go anywhere. You can get markets wherever you can go. The fourth is the side hustle, side gig. In the US, this year, more people will be freelance than full-time employees.
Wow. I didn't know.
Okay. And finally, the impact of COVID, which was not only on where you work, but why you work and who you work for. So it's not just, do I come to the office or not? But a lot of people were basically saying, I'm seeing people die around me. I've not been at work for 3-4 years. Why am I doing this? Who am I working for?
It's the purpose.
It's a purpose, right? So you take all those 5 and they're connected, because now let's suppose you say, I actually want to do something in addition to. Well, now I can. Why? Because I may not be in the office 5 days a week. Oh, and by the way, I have this thing called Etsy where I can sell my stuff.
Yeah.
You see how they're all connected.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 forces.
Amazing. So I have if I could, I would do like
Sure.
100 questions, but I will ask my friends
Perfect.
also to bring some of them. So
Absolutely.
Iza.
Yeah, I have a question. You talk about rehumanizing work. How is that in practice? How is that an example of rehumanizing work?
So here's the reason why rehumanizing work is very important. So whenever we talk about companies growing or companies transforming, I simply say, what does that mean? Like, one of the few places where you could say a place is transforming and growing is where we are.
Yes.
Because I walked around, like 10 weeks ago, none of this was here, and 10 weeks from now, it won't be here. But in most places, the walls don't change. The name doesn't change. The only thing that grows and transforms in a company are the people.
Other people.
Right? So I said companies don't transform or grow, people transform or grow.
Yeah.
Now, if you notice, the word I'm using is people first. I'm not using the word employee or worker first. Okay? I'm not saying we aren't employees and workers, but we're people first. And what people want to basically do, and if you ask for why do you stay in a company, why do you take risks in a company, why do you, leave a company, almost every time what you'll basically hear is not about some grand strategic vision, not about like where they are. It'll basically be about people.
About a person you're leaving.
Right. I'm leaving this person. People are not treating me like I should be treated. I'm not growing as a human being. Things like that.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the reason I thought humanizing was very important. The other reason why it's very important is we are now in an age, which all of us are working on, which is an age of AI. And AI is very intelligent. Okay?
Extremely intelligent.
It's called alien intelligence. Remember in the old days, they used to say, you should surround yourself with people smarter than you. Right? So
AI is-
today, if you are sitting in a room with a phone, you are surrounding yourself with someone smarter than you. Right? If you have one of these like ChatGPT or Gemini, you've got someone smarter than you already in the room. And so I think human intelligence will be overcome by AI. But other parts of humanity won't be. And that is things like human intuition and human insight and human interaction. So I believe this future of work, one, people stay in a company because of very human things. So I ask people, why do you join a company? I'll tell you what people join a company for, right? Money, fame, and power. You join a company for money, fame, and power. So somebody says, no, I'm not joining a company for money, fame, and power. I said, you join the company for money, fame, and power, right? If you're a younger person, the fame might be recognition, the power might be autonomy. But why do you stay in a company?
Because of
Because
people.
of people.
Yeah, for purpose, values, and connections. Whatever company you work for, including Publicis, is how we as HI work with AIs. But if it's only about AI, we won't have a job.
Yeah.
And we won't be differentiated. We'd be like everybody else.
It's what we do beyond the AI that will make a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is the key thing. So what do we bring to it, right? So the way I look at it is this. I think AI is very important. It's been highly underappreciated even today. But I don't believe that we will actually differentiate ourselves through AI.
AI will make us the
Right.
same.
We will differentiate ourselves by what we bring to AI. So I'll give you an idea. Suppose I came to you and you were Publicis, right? And I was a new company called Rishad Tobaccowala LLC. And I go to my client, our client, with some of us. So I want to take this business away from Publicis.
Yeah.
So I shall go to my client, and I say, I'm an AI powered company. That's why you need to give the business to me. Right? The client will basically say, so is
it's not.
Publicis.
Yes.
Right? Because it's the equivalent of me saying, I'm an electricity powered company. Like, am I competing with steam engine people? Like, tell me which company isn't working on AI and isn't talking about AI,
correct.
right? If you notice WPP Media, when they rebranded, their sub-headline for some strange reason is an AI-powered company. I don't know what that means, but it's WPP Media, an AI-powered company. Well,
We're
every
all
company is an AI-powered company.
This is a given.
Right, it's like an electricity-powered company. So it's what we bring. And what do we bring? The talent, the people who are listening to this.
Yeah.
Leaders. And everybody's a leader, but you all are too. So that's leaders, right? Culture. Principles,
Values.
right? Values, taste, voice. That's the reason I make it about humans. But by the way, we'll have to do it with these, because just like you could have taste and you could have voice and you could have everything, but if you decided not to use electricity, you wouldn't succeed. So we're all going to have to use AI.
We have to.
But it's going to be necessary but not sufficient
Yeah.
to win.
Okay.
Rishad, you talked in the beginning about how COVID changed, everybody's life. Probably it was a tipping point on the way we work,
Yes.
Because suddenly we said, it's okay that I work from whatever. It's okay that I am connected and not physically there. I think we learned a lot. But it changed the way we work, and it's probably because it was collective.
Yep.
It changed for everyone. So I wanted that you talked a little bit on how does it change and how we adapt. No, COVID is in the past, but we change it, and there is this challenge of a new way of working.
Yeah.
Is a challenge. There is challenge on how we create culture with this new hybrid modes. So what have changed and what we should be looking at to adapt?
So here are some of the things that have basically changed. The best way to think about it is, we're in a speakeasy, which, right? And a speakeasy somewhere will have a bottle of champagne. Okay. So let's say we open the bottle of champagne. When the bottle of champagne opens, have you ever tried to put the cork back in the bottle of champagne? Okay. It doesn't. You know why? Because it swells. It doesn't fit. What happened during COVID, our emotions and minds swelled. They no longer fit.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And we're trying to put people back into the champagne bottle, but our whole stuff is like, it no longer fits. See, and we're saying, pick, 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 pick. It doesn't work, right? So what are the ways it changed? And then what are some of the challenges? Because we have to run companies. So there are three big changes. The first big change, as I basically said, is, I can get a lot of work done without actually having to go physically to a company. And the reality of it is most companies did really well over the 3 years where things were closed. mostly.
Yes.
So you can't basically say, well, the company fell apart. It didn't fall apart. Okay. So that's sort of number one. So, hey, maybe I don't have to work. I don't have to go to the office every day. So it's the first thing. The second is, hey, I'm sitting at home and there's stuff that I actually have missed during my running to the office. I like being with my aging parents. I like being with my children. I like being with my partner. Now, in some cases, for about 20% of the people, they discovered they did not like being with their partner, by the way. Divorces went up because the whole idea was, oh my God, I have to spend time with this person, right? There was those kinds of stuff, right? So there was this entire thing, which is there's some stuff I like, which I'd like to keep as we move into the future, and the other stuff I may not like. I don't want to be cooped up in the house all the time, whatever that is. That's the second. The third thing that basically began to happen, which was very, very important, is all of us discovered things among us that we didn't know we had. So a lot of people started these side businesses. I'm going to write something because we had time a little, and we had time because we found we weren't commuting, right? And in most, like in our industry, most of our employees tend to be in major cities that tend to be very expensive to live near. So you commute a lot, right? For most people, you commute an hour back and forth, 45 minutes. And there's obviously a frustration. And there's one of the very interesting studies is happiness is directly, inversely correlated with commute time. Right? The less you commute, the happier you are.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which is one of the, because you don't have all the frustrations, etc. So you basically began to think in your mind, hey, I can do work from anywhere. There's stuff that I'd like to keep here. And there's these other things in my life that I want to do. So broadly what happened is we used to ask the question, how do we have work-life balance? And in that work-life balance, especially for younger people, the old question used to be, how do I fit life into my work? And the new question is, how do I fit work into my life? Okay, again, I'm generalizing. Changes with different people.
But that makes sense. The new generation.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but you have a different mindset. And one of the reasons of the different mindset is if you're younger, and again, this I'm not specific because I'm not familiar with the Brazilian history, but let me talk about, but most of these are cycles that have happened all over the world. So if you look at US, someone who's Gen Z has basically seen three things happen to them as they were growing up. 9/11, the 2008-2009 recession, 7-8, COVID, right? And what did they see? They saw their mothers and fathers who had given their entire life to their company lose their jobs each time, right? And the whole stuff is, what did you do that for? So I often go to boards with this particular line. And because I used to be on boards and I'm still on some private equity boards, it doesn't look like I'm completely insane, okay? So I said, there's an entire generation of people who would like your power and your wealth, but don't want to be like you. I said, they don't like your life. They like your money. And they don't believe you had to give up your life to get that money. Right?
Yeah.
They said, and a lot of the senior people said, you can't do this without everything we gave up. And I said, I'm not sure in today's world if that's true. It might have been true 20, 30 years ago. It's not necessarily true today. And so that is a very big different mindset. And that is what we have. And obviously there's difference. There's no answer for any particular part. But often what a lot of mistakes we made is we basically give people one size fits all. So I often tell people, we talk about personalization, we talk about agility, we talk about flexibility, but why don't we make it possible for everybody? Why is it only for customers? Right? We talk about segmentation of markets. Why don't we treat our employees differently?
But then how do we, the challenge of creating culture in this different
So
environment?
here's a basic belief. I've studied culture. So I will give you what I believe culture is. And I think one of the reasons like Publicis does well is it has many of the components of this culture. Okay. And the 4 components that make a culture, I'm going to tell you, it's got nothing to do with the space. Okay. Unless you had a space like this would be really, right? But otherwise it doesn't. Like if you got these beautiful spaces and amazing spaces where I wanted to live here, that's good. But if you go to most offices, oh, come on. That's not like a culture thing. Unless you've designed it specifically for that. And most people haven't designed it until recently before that. So the first and most important part of culture is excellence, a commitment to excellence. And there are 3 types of excellence. Do you have excellent services and products? Do you have excellent financial results? And do you have excellent people? Right? I would say one of the reasons that you all are doing so well in Brazil is because that's what you have, right? You've got excellent products and they're obviously connected.
Mm.
Excellent products and services are created by excellent people that drive excellent financial results.
Yes.
But sometimes I say like a culture is about excellence. Let's stop there. It's not about a space. It's about excellence. How do we achieve excellence? That's number 1. Okay. Number 2 is it's about a growth mindset, which is how we're learning, right? So obviously one Publicis globally has excellence. So people, it helps. When you're winning, people want to come and work for you. You get clients. So that's one. It has a growth mindset in the fact that Publicis invests a lot of money, whether it's in Marcel or training or, work your world, in learning. It's a growth mindset. So that's the second one.
Yeah.
The third thing that it basically happens to have is it's got to have collaboration, right? Whenever people work together, it's always difficult. Look, 2 people in a room will have a fight sooner or later. So it's not just at work, right? But in order to have collaboration, we have things like power of one.
Yes.
Right?
Common goals.
And then the last thing you have, and which we need to do even a better job of, is honest and open communication.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay? Which is what I call in my first book, the turd on the table, which is we sit around the table, there's a piece of brown thing in the middle. Let's not pretend it's a brownie. Someone has to say it's a piece of shit. Right? And usually we are scared of that. Okay? And if there's one thing I would say in a French heritage company, remember in France they had Louis XIV. We still have that mentality.
Yeah.
Which is, the kings and queens. Well, we have to get rid of the kings. No, I'm going to say cut their heads off. But we have to think a little bit different.
Yeah.
But that's what a culture is. Right? Now, in order to create that, you often have to get people together.
Yes.
Okay? So that's a different thing. But as I was mentioning today, I just launched a new show called the Rethinking Work Show, which is on YouTube, Spotify, etc. And the guest I have is a Harvard Business School professor who's just written a book called The World is Your Office. And he's done research for 10 years. He was at Wharton, he was at McKinsey before that. And he basically shows that companies that basically manage in-person interaction with massive flexibility are growing faster than anybody else. What do I mean by that? He basically believes that you should start by saying everybody can work from anywhere in the world anytime they want. That's the starting point.
Well,
right? You start there. You say everybody, so I'm going to hire people from anywhere I want. You can work anywhere you want. Okay. And he says hybrid and remote, most people think is 3 or 4 days in the office a week. He says, no. You can say, okay, you can work from anywhere. You can decide whether you work from home, you work from a Starbucks, you work from a WeWork, you work from, you can decide what's right for you. You can work from anywhere. But now we need to basically create cultures. We have to have for different clients, we have to do different things. So he says, now let's think about this. Let's start off by basically saying everybody comes together 1 week a month. So everybody comes 1 week a month. He says when you have 1 week a month, which is like 3 or 4 days, people can live pretty far away in a country. They can live like 300-400 miles because once every month for 3 days, they got to go find a hotel or Airbnb and stay. And then he says, at some particular stage, you say once a quarter, 1 week a quarter. And the companies that eventually get to 1 week a quarter are the ones that are doing the very best. And what they do is certain companies go 1 week a quarter, they put teams together, and then they put everybody together once a year in an exotic location for 10 days, which is like this: training, education, speakers. Intensive in-person learning and interaction. So what you basically do is it's like a child learning to toddle, right? First you do 3 days a week. Then you do 3 days a month. Then you do 3-4 days a quarter. And then you keep it at that. And then sub-teams come at different times. Yeah. And for particular things, right? So you it's very subtle. So but what you basically begin to have is you have flexibility. And you change it. You may have a client that requires 5 days service. 5 days. So for that, you say, by the way, for this client is 5 days service. For people who work on this, this is that. But you segment, right?
Yeah.
And so what begins to happen is it puts a little bit more pressure, but over time, the reason why I think it's very important is I go to the same CEOs and who are asking everybody to come back all the time, and I give them a couple of drinks, like here. Okay, I first make them read my book, right? I said, just read the book. I give them like a summary. I said, go to my website, go watch me on these videos. So
listen to the podcast.
Since you have no time to read the book, you can do that, right? So listen to the podcast, do something. Okay. So I said, now let's have a drink. You read the book? Yeah. What is nobody says it's terrible. So I said, okay, interesting. So I said, okay, fine. So I said, now with everything you know, inside your fine mind, right? You who are so senior, right? So let's say I'm coming to you, the CEO of a company, you're senior. Inside you, there is a young version of you. And that young version of you is why you became successful. Right? Who took risks, who did innovative things, etc. So I said, bring her back. Just bring her back. Have a couple of drinks, bring her back. So she's now sitting next to you. Right? Now, create a company that'll compete with your company where there are no rules. Show me how it works. It'll be what my book says. It won't be what most companies look like. What you basically do is I'll say, I'm going to hire people from everywhere in the world. Right? I'm going to operate in different ways. Because guess what? I can today. So most people think that they have sunken legacy costs.
Yeah.
Right? Jamie Dimon has 30% of his balance sheet is commercial real estate. So he has to say, come back to the office. Amazon wanted to get rid of 20% of their employees without severance. So they said, come back to the office. I have data and research that shows this. So I said, that's not what they're doing. In fact, most people, if you actually see the research, are going the direction of my book. Not this way. The headlines are saying, the reason the headlines are because it's so stupid. Remember, the headlines always are about things that are stupid, right? Or violent. That's the stuff the headlines are about. Like, do you really think that WPP called everybody back 4 days a week? They wanted to do it because they wanted to lay off 20% of the people before they went to WPP Media.
Yeah, and when we look for, like, we are living in an era, and we do this in our office. So in Publicis, we have the pleasure to have our legend, our Brazilian legend, that it's Marlene Bregman, that it's our Tobaccowala, that she's in Publicis, coming from Bonet for more than 4 years. But we also have our internships that just arrived. So living in an era with so many different generations with different pains, how do you see that the impact of this new mindset and new working way, it will affect the different generations?
So I think it'll make it much better for everybody. So one of the key things we've known is more seasoned people get a lot of energy from young people. So it's one of the reasons why increasingly, at old age homes, they keep young children around. They keep people running around because it keeps you young, right? Similarly, I always say, if you can, try to learn how to bicycle on other people's knees, right? Which is, can you get someone else's experience without having to repeat the same mistake? So if you're younger, right, and many of us sometimes think we have all the answers, you can basically say, hey, some of these people may have certain things that may be very sort of valuable. So between generations important. What is important is to recognize what are some of the differences. And some of the differences are, as I said, background, mindset, mentality, even demographics. So I'll give you an idea. The baby boomers in the United States, 20% of baby boomers are non-Caucasian. So 80% are Caucasian, 20% are non-Caucasian. In Gen Z, it's 51% non-Caucasian.
Wow.
Right? So these people have grown up diverse, and these people are trying to figure out whether diversity, equity, and inclusion is good or bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you see the difference?
Yeah, sure.
And if you actually get them together, they won't have these silly fights. Right?
But they'll learn.
Right? Which is like, hey, tell me why you believe what you believe, and tell me why I believe what I believe. So that happens to be one of those key things. And what you'll also find is something very innovative. So in the next week or two, because we've recorded it, I have this amazing, I managed to get him on the show. I have this absolutely amazing conversation with Sir John Haggerty of BBH on What Next. Okay. And I didn't know him, well. He invited me 6 weeks ago on his show. He has a show called The Business of Creativity. And because I keep talking about how important creativity is, right? So he had me on his show. And then I said, hey, Sir John, would you be willing to come on What Next? So he said, yes. And I had him on, and I said, I'm going to ask you some questions. And I said, I know you run a special program where people pay to get these answers. Could you give these answers? Which he did, right? And among the things you'll notice with these very legendary people is how they actually think like children.
Curious.
Always
learning.
They're always learning, right? And the way I always tell people is, like, when I meet senior people, and I said, remember, there's a child in you, right?
Yeah.
And then I say, hey, let me talk to you about a gravestone, right? I said, there are two lines. So one line I've always thought was very interesting was, every career is a midnight hour, you leave at 5 to 12. So I said, I pulled it off. And if you do that, they still like you. They call you back and you stay connected, right?
Yeah.
Which is number one. But number two is, there's a very famous movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey, right? It's written by a gentleman called Arthur C. Clarke. And he moved to Sri Lanka, which is Ceylon, Sri Lanka now. And he's buried outside of Colombo, the city of Colombo. And on his grave is the following lines. Arthur C. Clarke, okay? Always growing, never grew up. Right?
Great.
And so I remind people, if you're running a growth company, which most CEOs are, when did you stop growing?
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's really, really special.
Yeah.
So I would say that probably we can spend like hours here, but I will invite our guests, other guests. So Iza, to have a very special question now.
Yes, I think that after all you told about the leadership and the role that we play, what's your advice to us leadership on dealing with this rapid change, 5 generations together, 4 generations together, a new way of looking at work? What's your advice?
So I would say, first of all, that everybody who's on this, so every single person who works inside your company is a leader, okay? And then there are you who have leadership with some additional burdens, okay? It's the best way of thinking about it.
Or responsibility.
Or responsibilities.
Yeah.
So I basically believe that there are 3 types of people in the world, and we need 2 of them for sure, and 1 less off. So what is I call a boss, a second I call a manager, and third I call a leader. So I believe that one of the reasons why people did not want to come back to the office was they did not want to come back to bosses. So I basically believe that what a boss does is they're a zone of control freaks. I need to see you, I need to monitor, I need to check in, I need to monitor.
I need to predict.
Predict, right? So we have entered what I call an age of de-bossification. So people don't want to come back to bosses. So I always tell people, dial down your bossiness. We all have that in us, right? So I said, dial down the bossiness,
All right.
not necessary. That leaves the other two, which is manager and leader. Both of those are important. But what I say is, well, a boss is about a zone of control. A leader is about a zone of influence.
Mm-hmm.
So a boss thinks like they're a conductor in a orchestra. And a leader thinks they're a jazz player. They improvise.
Yeah.
There's clearly sometimes lead, but they
You're just giving the
right.
pace, the tone.
So the first is everybody, and by the way, a leader doesn't require anybody to report to you because it's a zone of influence, right? And it's improvisation. So nobody needs to report to you. So every single person should remember they may not be a boss, they may not be a manager, but they have the capability of being a leader. Managers also are very important because they make the business go. So when people say get rid of middle management, get rid of management, I said, hey, you don't know how a company works. You actually need to have people to run the company. But what a manager does is they spend their time doing two different things, both of which are very important. So one thing that a manager does is they do things where they control quality control, monitor, check, look at processes, just to make sure the train runs on time. Otherwise, there won't be a train.
Yeah.
And then the other part of what they do is they build, they create, they mentor, they guide. Right?
They envision.
And envision. So manager does both of those. And every leader obviously is a manager too. But I said over time, do less of this and more of the right-hand side. So if you're spending about majority of your time doing the quality control monitoring, right, dial that down, because that will increasingly be done by the machines.
Sure.
And the more you do this, the more you're likely to be a leader. Again, you're going to need that to run a business. You just can't like be a, you need that. So my basic belief is to everybody, you have the leadership.
Dial down your bossness.
Specifically for seasoned leaders. I don't call you all senior, aged, or old because I just call ourselves seasoned.
Great.
So seasoned, which sounds spicy, right? We're sort of seasoned leaders. I basically say there are three pieces of information I give seasoned leaders. Because they ask me, I said, look, the biggest challenge we have is when our clients ask us questions, they actually ask us three questions, we're only listening to two. So the questions that our clients are asking is, how do we keep my business model relevant? Second question they ask is, do I have the right organizational design partners and suppliers, which include us, right? The third question that they're asking that we're not like to listening to, but I now have begun to listen to because they only ask me that question since I can't help them on one or two anymore. So they say, okay, you're useless there. So now we can only ask you this, right? So the third question is what they're really asking about themselves, which is, are they still relevant? Right?
This is a challenge.
Are they still yes, they've got power and they got control and they got the title. But in a world with all these changes, are they still relevant? Right? So I basically say, of course you are, but here's what you have to do to stay that way. Like, I'm not going to go tell people you're not relevant. Of course you are. But here's what you have to stay that way. So that's my advice to you all, which are the following three, which is also for everybody who's younger, but definitely for more senior people. Starting tomorrow, put 1 hour a day on your calendar to learn. Including, by the way, get someone young in your company to teach you something, whatever it is. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is once in a while, not all the time, build a case for the exact opposite of what you are recommending or what you believe. Right?
Challenge your thinking.
Challenge your thinking, right, which is the second. And then the third one, which I basically often tell people, is broadly, and I used to basically, the third one used to be build or make things or create things. But I've changed that to something more interesting, which is think like an immigrant. Okay. And here's why I basically say think like an immigrant. What does an immigrant think like? They think like an outsider. When you're very senior, you hang out with other senior people. Without knowing it, you've got insider thinking. So think like an outsider. Second is, what does an immigrant think like? An underdog. When you've arrived very senior, you're an overdog. You're not an underdog. Right? And therefore, you basically say, I'm in my castle with my moat. As an immigrant will say, wait a second, you're a castle, but the moat is water with which I'm going to flood you out of your castle. And the third is, as a leader, we're always under pressure to make sure we make our numbers, because otherwise we have trouble. Immigrant also thinks with a long-term perspective. They'll take short-term pain for going forth, right? And interestingly, though, we all pressurized, not me anymore because I don't have to worry about it, but we're all pressurized to make numbers and do everything, which is all true, because otherwise you can't have all this excellence culture, excellence everything.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I think Publicis did what it did is because it also made some long-term bets and investments that cost money, including share price and a whole bunch of stuff. What people don't realize is when Maurice and others led a whole bunch of acquisitions, there was a time up to 4 years ago that the total amount of money that we spent on re-engineering the company, which was about $11 billion at that time, was more than the market value of the whole company.
Wow.
Okay. Now, I haven't checked the recent, it's worth $30 billion, right? And more valuable than all the other. In fact, at a particular stage, it's more valuable than WPP and Omnicom put together.
Yeah.
Right? But people were laughing because they were doing things that made no sense. And in the near term, it hurt us. Right? So even though we were focused supposedly on the short term, there was also this investment for the long term.
Yeah.
And so what I would say, think like an immigrant, think like an outsider, think like an underdog, and think with a both short-term and long-term perspective, because you can't only think with the long-term, you won't have a job. So you have to balance the two. And the leaders can do a better job of balancing than other people can.
Changing gears here. You mentioned BRICS in the beginning, no? And we are, I think, in Brazil and in India and I don't know, maybe China is off this. Maybe Brazil is.
I think it's now become bi, because Russia seems to be gone off in a different direction. South Africa, I don't know what's going on, and China seems to be the enemy for most people.
We are a very a lot of what you are saying here is we need to keep being entrepreneurial learners, and I think Brazilians are a lot like this.
Yes.
But it's a lot because of need.
Yep.
No, it's not.
You'll have to hustle because you have to hustle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
You don't have other choice.
we know. So most of our people needs to be entrepreneurial so they can make the ends meet. But with all these changes that we are saying about the work, probably we are the most vulnerable population as well, with all these changes that you said in the beginning. No, so how do you see populations like the one in Brazil affected by this future of work, or what can we benefit for this, or what are things that we need to change to be able to adapt?
So I'll give you a perspective. So the Indian version of your hustle is called Jugaad, which is we just make it happen, right? Mm-hmm. And Anupriya invited me to go speak to her clients and in her office. But the reason I was there is India has its own little mini cans. It's called Goa Fest. So she wanted me to speak there. And then she did a panel with me. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I ended up telling people, which was some of the big headlines there, was that India should stop believing that they're anything but the best in the world. Right? I said, I don't understand, why are we playing like this? So the first thing I would basically tell people in Brazil and everybody else is start thinking about being best in the world and not trying to line up to somebody else's. Part of it is a mindset, right? Mm-hmm. At some particular stage, I tell people, you have to start believing you're world class to be world class. Now, it might be a delusion, but you got to have a vision. You can't basically not have that, right? Yeah. And as a massive country, as I just said, this city is bigger than any city outside of maybe Shanghai, Mumbai, and Beijing or some other place, right, in Tokyo. So that's one. But I think the very big thing is I believe that this modern world allows... I'd be much more scared if I was a established country than a growing country. Here's why. I'll give you 3 very interesting statistics. So until recently, if you really wanted to be a world-class software writer, you had to be maybe in Silicon Valley, and maybe at a slightly less, you could be in Bangalore or some places like that. Now, because of a thing called GitHub, and because of what they call vibe coding, right? GitHub is a Microsoft thing where people can go write stuff. GitHub will, by the end of this decade, have 1 billion users.
Wow.
800 million will come from Asia and Latin America and Africa. Technology is the slingshot that allows David to bring down Goliath. And I'm not talking about a fight. So I'm just saying technology is a slingshot that allows people to rise to the next level. I don't want to bring down anybody, right? It allows people to rise to the next level. The ability to basically... Why did Saudi Arabia or the Middle East jump over a lot of other countries when it came down to telecommunications? Because they completely jumped over landlines. They don't have to worry about landlines, right? Which is today the world's best market for streaming video? You'd be surprised. It's India. The cost of bandwidth in India, right, is the lowest in the world.
I didn't know that.
Right? It is the number one, not in dollar terms, but number one user of YouTube. Number one user of LinkedIn. Number one user of WhatsApp. Okay? So what we're looking at is countries suddenly saying, wait a second, these are new rules. So when the rules change, if you're not an incumbent, it's really cool. Now, I'm going to give you something else. I'm very bullish on Brazil. I'm also very bullish on Publicis, but I also say Publicis is now at risk. And the reason Publicis is at risk is for two reasons. We happen to be the biggest. And whenever there's a time of change, we are now Goliath. And they're little... Remember, the whole idea was that we were the underdog, we were the lion, right? Well, now we own the zoo. Okay, so the first is there's this mindset, which is, oh my God, we have to think about that. Obviously, our management does. So that's number one. The second, and this is the bigger challenge, I think, for our business, and it's for every services business, is a lot of the way our business works is we eventually charge for hours. Right? The trick is going to be the number of hours to get a particular thing done is going to decline from 20 to 50%. And it's highly unlikely that a client is going to say, you keep the money. Right? And many of you all were clients, right? So you say, I'm not going to really keep the money. But does that mean we're in trouble? Not necessarily. It actually means this is a great opportunity, but we have to think slightly differently. Which is, let's suppose to get the same amount of work, it allows us to spend 30% less time. First is maybe some of that 30% less time is stupid time, so it's good. But now we have that 30%, which we can either give back to the client, which we could, or we can basically say we can help the client reimagine their business in new ways without paying us anything anymore, right? Because we always were asked to innovate and pioneer, but there was no money to innovate or pioneer. And now we say, hey, we have to reimagine the business because our clients are under the same pressure.
Yes.
Right? See, the thing that I try to remind people is there are three things that are going to happen because of AI, and everyone's focusing only on two. And it's the third one that I want us to think about. Are you ready for this? So we keep thinking about efficiency, which is important, which is how do you make something cheaper? Or effective. How will we do versioning of ads better? Video. That's more effective. Here it's more efficient. And sometimes they're both. Okay. The biggest opportunity and threat to us and our clients, but if we go to our clients and say this is the biggest threat and opportunity and we can help solve it, is reimagining your business, which I basically call is existential risk and threats. So what do I mean by that? Sometime I forget the year, it was something in the middle of the 2000s, 2004, 2005. I used to do some work for the New York Times. Not myself. There were like 25, 30 people that the head, at that time, the CEO of New York Times Digital invited me, why news at night, Martin's Law. They said, I'm trying to change the New York Times, but they aren't getting it. So they launched a thing called an innovation project. So for 2 years, they wanted to reimagine their business. So now let me explain to you what has happened. In the world of American publishing, almost everybody has become a small size compared to what it was, print publishing.
Mm-hmm.
But the New York Times is
Except
not.
for them.
Okay. So here's what basically happened. And I was through this whole process. The New York Times originally basically looked at digital as a way to become more efficient and more effective, which is how do they make their printing presses work faster? How do they make their trucks deliver in a better way? How do they do their page one meetings in a better way? Efficient and effective, right? Until this innovation project that we all worked on basically said the following. This is existential risk and opportunity. You can be more efficient and effective, but the business model doesn't work anymore.
No.
Right? So therefore, you have to think of yourself no longer as a newspaper company, no longer page one meetings, no longer printing presses, and no longer trucks. Today, for every one person they have as a subscriber in the print magazine, print newspaper, which is about 1 million, they have 10 million subscribers online.
Yeah.
Subscribers, right? 35% of their business has nothing to do with news. They sell Wordle games and things like that, right? That is the big thing that we have to rethink our business, just like we did.
Yeah.
We went away. The reason Publicis today is very different than it was 15 years ago. We reimagined our business, right? Well, the good news is we reimagined our business so we can help our clients reimagine theirs, while we also have to reimagine ours. So I think the biggest opportunity for us is, yes, we'll do the efficient and effectiveness, but we can reimagine your business. And that is going to be the big challenge our clients are going to have. How do they reimagine their business? Not just how do they make their current business more efficient and effective.
We all need to keep reimagining our
Yes.
businesses.
Yes.
In the end, that's
Right. So what basically happens is, one of the big things I've always talked about is eventually, so if you notice, the book is called Rethinking, right? My Substack is called The Future Does Not Fit in the Containers of the Past. The podcast is called What Next?
It's all
Everything
It's
is about
about
reinvention,
Yes.
right? And so my whole stuff is, that's what we should be. It's all about reinvention. And if anybody tells me that they can't do it, I said, you do, because taking away nothing from religion, every morning you're practicing resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
You wake up,
Yeah.
right? You died in the night and you wake up. So every day you're reinventing yourself. So why don't you do it in a big way?
So unfortunately, we have to end.
Yes.
But for me, it was amazing to have you and listen to you. It's the beauty of working in Publicis now. It's believing that our founder, Marcel, told us in the beginning, some years ago, almost 100 years ago, that everything changes, but creativity keeps in the center. So to reimagine everything, we need creativity, So
Absolutely.
probably we are on time because we are the creative
Absolutely.
people.
And then, next year we have to start our second 100 years.
Yes.
Because
Reimagine our future.
next year is a 100-year anniversary.
Exactly. So we are ready to celebrate the last 100, but to be part of the next 100 also,
Absolutely.
What's next?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Obrigada a todos. Até o próximo.